Welcome to Vibrations and Manifestations. I am so glad you're joining us for this deep dive today. I'm Jared.
And I'm Alicia.
This is Season 2, Episode 110, which we are calling The Courage to Be Seen, Showing Up as Who You Are Now.
I'm really looking forward to this one. It feels like the exact right time in the season for this conversation.
It really does, because last time we focused heavily on reconnecting and stabilizing conflict,
Right.
rebuilding the bridge. But today is all about what happens after you rebuild it. And before we get into the mechanics of that, I actually wanted to ask you about your week. You mentioned before we started recording that you had a really strange encounter a few days ago.
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, it was such a textbook example of what we were talking about today. So I was at the grocery store on Tuesday, just minding my business in the produce aisle, picking out avocados, and I hear my name.
Oh no, the produce aisle run-in.
Right? The classic ambush. And I turn around, and it's someone I used to work with, gosh, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, back when I was fully in my hyper-independent, completely burned out, never ask for help era.
Wow. Okay. That is a very specific version of you.
Exactly. And she was lovely. She really was. But within 10 seconds of talking to her, I realized she was talking to a version of me that it doesn't exist anymore. It felt like she was looking at a frozen photograph of me from 2019. She kept saying things like, "Oh, I know you're probably working 80-hour weeks right now. You were always the machine."
Wow. How did your body react to that?
It was a deeply surreal split second because I felt this immediate, almost gravitational pull in my stomach to just step backward into that old frame. You know, I could literally feel my tone of voice changing. I almost did this old self-deprecating laugh I used to do. It's like my brain was saying, just play the role. Just be the machine. It will make this interaction so much easier.
Because it's frictionless. It takes zero energy to just agree and be who they expect you to be.
Yeah, totally. But I didn't. I held my ground and I just smiled and said, "Oh no, I actually really prioritize my rest these days. I don't do the 80-hour weeks anymore." And there was this tiny flash of confusion on her face. And when I walked away to my car, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt profoundly disoriented and honestly kind of shaky.
Shaky is the perfect word. And that feeling, that exact moment by the avocados, is the terrain we are mapping out today. Because what you experienced wasn't just an awkward social moment. You were forced into an internal negotiation. Do I slide back into the old dynamic to keep things easy? Or do I stay in my new posture and gently force this person to update their lens?
And that is the core of our mission today for everyone listening. We want to help you understand that visibility, when you actually show up as your evolved self, isn't just a social dynamic. It is a biological initiation.
Yes, it is an initiation.
We want to unpack how you can stand steadily in your new identity without shrinking, without performing some new character to prove yourself, and without reverting back to the past. Because what we are really talking about isn't conflict, it's exposure.
Exposure. That is such a vital distinction. Because let's say you do the heavy lifting in your life. You have a hard conversation with a parent. Or you repair a burned bridge with a friend. You speak your truth. You would logically assume that right after that you'd feel amazing, light, liberated.
But you usually don't.
No, you don't.
Dang.
Instead, this completely new, heavy discomfort arrives. You hit send on the honest text message, it says delivered, and you genuinely consider throwing your phone into a river.
I have absolutely wanted to throw my phone into a river, more times than I can count.
Right. You sit there thinking, oh no, they see the real me now. Do they actually like who I've become? Wait, do I even like who I've become?
There is a highly accurate term for that state, the vulnerability hangover. Brené Brown's work really popularized this, and it is the perfect description. It's that raw, deeply exposed, almost nauseous feeling that hits you the morning after you reveal a new part of your identity.
The adrenaline of the confrontation fades, and you realize you can't unring the bell.
Exactly. You've put the new you out there, and the reframing of this reflex is so crucial for our listeners, because the instinct is to view that urge to hide as a sign of weakness. You think, oh, I must not be fully healed if I feel this scared. But visibility tests something different. Conflict tests your survival. Repair tests your humility. But visibility tests your integrity.
It tests whether you can hold your new shape when other people are actively looking at you. And to make this idea of the vulnerability hangover concrete, I think we should talk about Brené Brown's own experience with this, because it illustrates this phenomenon on a massive scale.
It really does. If you go back to June of 2010, she is at a TEDx event in Houston. It wasn't the massive global stage yet. It was just a local auditorium. And up until that afternoon, she had been a very private, measured academic. She studied vulnerability from behind the safety of spreadsheets and data.
She had the academic armor on.
Exactly. But for this specific talk, she made the terrifying decision to drop the armor. She stepped onto that red circle, and halfway through her presentation, she shifted from clinical data to a highly unvarnished story about her own spiritual breakdown. She admitted she had been studying vulnerability to avoid practicing it.
Which completely changed the energy in the room. It went from a lecture to a moment of pure exposure.
And the audience loved it. She got a standing ovation. She went home thinking, okay, that was just one room in Texas. I survived. The vulnerability was contained. But then the video was uploaded to the internet.
And the scale of the exposure fundamentally changed.
Right. It went from a few thousand views to millions. She went from being a private researcher to a highly scrutinized global figure almost overnight. And the reason we bring this up isn't about the success of the talk. It's about the profound nervous system shock she experienced after. She has spoken very candidly about the agonizing vulnerability hangover that followed that viral explosion, the absolute terror that she had shared too much.
Because being vulnerable in a closed room is one thing. Realizing the room has expanded to include millions of strangers is a completely different biological event.
As your impact expands, your fear expands equally. Once your internal growth is witnessed by the outside world, you can never put it back in the box.
But let's bring this right down to the listener, because most of you listening are not going to give a viral TED Talk this week. You might just be going to a chaotic family dinner.
Yeah, the scale is different, but the biological mechanism is identical. You experience microversions of this exposure every single time you show up authentically, every time you hold a new boundary at work, or even just update your social media to reflect a new career path. You are stepping onto your own red circle.
And the second you ask to be witnessed in that new way, your brain starts running a threat assessment.
It immediately asks one fundamental question: are we safe? And that passive observation activates three highly specific internal pressures. These are the psychological forces that try to push you back into the safety of the known.
I love breaking these down because once you see these pressures, you stop judging yourself for feeling them. So let's get into it. Pressure number one is reversion pressure.
Reversion pressure is exactly what I felt in the produce aisle. It is the gravitational pull to become exactly who you used to be. Old roles, no matter how toxic they are incredibly efficient for the brain. They are deeply familiar.
It's the path of least cognitive resistance.
Exactly. If you have spent 30 years being the quiet peacemaker who never rocks the boat, your brain knows that script perfectly. So when someone looks at you through that outdated lens, your nervous system whispers, just match their energy. It will be so much easier than explaining how much you've changed.
But I think a lot of people listening might say, well, wait, if I go back to my hometown for the holidays, playing the quiet peacemaker is literally a survival tactic. Why shouldn't I just put the mask back on for 3 days to avoid a massive argument? Isn't it just pragmatic to revert sometimes?
That is such a fair question. And honestly, it's the exact calculation your brain is making. It's deciding that the path of least resistance is the safest way to get through the weekend. But the psychological toll of that adaptation over time is massive.
Wait, that costs you your integrity.
Yes. Reversion is ultimately a betrayal of your own integration. When you put the mask back on, you are actively telling your own nervous system that your true, evolved self is not safe enough to exist in the real world. You survive the weekend, but you fragment your identity in the process.
You fragment your identity. You create a split between who you are internally and who you are willing to be externally, which leads directly to the second pressure, because sometimes we refuse to revert, but we overcompensate instead. Pressure number two is performance pressure.
Performance pressure happens when you resist the urge to shrink, but you swing too far the other way. You feel this frantic urge to prove your growth to everyone watching. You over-explain your new boundaries. You over-demonstrate your skills. You offer all these unprompted justifications for why you are different now.
Oh, I know this one intimately. It is basically visibility, but with a heavy suit of armor on. You're standing there saying, look at me. Look how much I've grown. Let me give you a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation on my new mindset.
It's exhausting to witness and exhausting to do.
It really is. You see it in the corporate world constantly. Someone gets promoted to a leadership role for the first time, and instead of just steadily doing the work, they start performing the idea of leadership. They use massive corporate buzzwords. They send emails at 2 in the morning just to prove they belong in that chair.
Or think about someone who just started a new wellness protocol. They can't just quietly eat their meal at a dinner party. They have to explain the exact metabolic science behind their food choices to the entire table.
Yes, And the tragic irony of performance pressure is that it's just another form of hiding.
It is. You aren't letting yourself be seen. You are letting people see a heavily curated performance. You are trying to micromanage their reaction to your growth, rather than just letting your growth speak for itself, which perfectly sets up the third layer. And honestly, this is the most terrifying one. Pressure number 3 is perception fear.
Perception fear is the terror of being misinterpreted or reduced to a caricature. It is the realization that visibility doesn't just expose who you are, it exposes how other people interpret who you are. And human interpretation is a chaotic metric that you cannot control.
That is the hardest pill to swallow. The lack of control.
What if you stand firm in your new boundaries and they label your confidence as arrogance? What if they view your necessary distance as cruelty? What if they just stubbornly cling to the old version of you and flat out refuse to see the new one?
It's paralyzing. You realize you can do everything right, you can be completely authentic and kind, and someone might still fundamentally misunderstand you.
This is where we have to bring in self-compassion. The work of Kristen Neff is so vital here. When you feel the weight of perception fear, your first instinct is usually to judge yourself. You think, I shouldn't care what they think. I should be stronger than this. But caring about how we are perceived is not a weakness. It is a universal human experience wired into our biology.
So for you listening right now, which of these 3 pressures is your default setting? When the heat is on, do you tend to revert and shrink to keep the peace? Do you put on the armor and perform? Or do you freeze up and agonize over being perceived incorrectly?
Identifying your default is the first step to dismantling it.
For me, I definitely lean towards performance pressure. The minute I feel misunderstood, I get this overwhelming urge to explain the why behind every single change I make. I want to build a logical argument for my existence.
Mine is definitely perception fear. I will overthink someone's slight frown for 3 business days.
Right. But all of this psychological pressure begs a deeper question. Why does this feel so intensely physical? Why does simply being seen differently trigger a bodily reaction that feels like you are in actual physical danger?
To answer that, we have to look beneath the psychology and examine the raw biology of exposure. The science here is incredibly illuminating. If you look at the research of Matthew Lieberman, he's a social cognitive neuroscientist who focuses on the neuroscience of social pain. To understand his findings, you have to look at our evolutionary history.
We just go back to the cave.
Exactly. For tens of thousands of years, human beings relied entirely on the tribe for survival. Being excluded from the group wasn't just sad, it meant physical isolation. And isolation in a harsh environment meant certain death. You could not survive the winter alone.
If the tribe decided you were acting too erratic or different and they kicked you out, your chances of survival dropped to absolute 0.
Precisely. And what Lieberman did was put participants inside an fMRI machine, a brain scanner, and map their neural activity while they experienced social rejection. He used a very simple virtual game called Cyberball. The participant thinks they are playing catch with 2 other people. After a few minutes, the other 2 avatars stop throwing the ball to the participant. They exclude them.
That sounds so incredibly mild.
It is. It's a trivial form of rejection. But when Lieberman looked at the brain scans of the excluded participants, a very specific area was highly active, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
And what does that specific part of the brain do?
That is the exact same neural pathway, the exact same alarm system that lights up when you experience acute physical pain. If you break your leg or burn your hand on a stove, that area fires. Lieberman's data demonstrates that the human brain evolved to treat social exclusion with the exact same severity as physical injury.
That completely recontextualizes everything.
It does. The brain does not possess a separate secondary alarm system for someone doesn't like me versus my physical body is being destroyed. It uses the same system. So the emotional pain of being misunderstood isn't just in your head. Well, it is in your head, but it's biologically identical to physical trauma. No wonder we want to hide. If showing up as your true self risks alienating your social group, your brain calculates that as a threat to your life.
This biological reality is further mapped out by polyvagal theory. The concept of neuroception is key here. Neuroception is the subconscious mechanism by which our nervous systems constantly scan our environment for cues of safety or threat. This happens entirely below conscious thought.
So before you even say hello, your body is reading the room.
Reading facial expressions, tone of voice, posture. When you are seen in a new, evolved form, especially by people whose neuroception expects the old, compliant you, there is a mismatch. Your body detects their confusion or their resistance and interprets that mismatch as dangerous territory.
And that is exactly when the physical symptoms hijack your body. Your chest tightens up, your face flushes and gets hot. Your throat feels constricted. You feel that sudden adrenaline spike telling you to fight, flee, or fawn.
The crucial takeaway for everyone listening is that those intense physical sensations are not character flaws. You aren't having a panic response because you lack confidence. It is pure ancient biology trying to protect your connection to the tribe.
And this biological imperative brings up a fascinating dynamic called the paradox of scale. Have you ever wondered why it is that when people start to achieve real, tangible success, when their business scales or their creative work reaches a massive new audience, they often experience a huge wave of internal resistance or imposter syndrome?
Because mathematically, more witnesses equals a higher potential for judgment and exclusion.
Yes. As the perceived audience grows, the nervous system calculates a statistically higher risk of rejection. More people looking at you equals a higher perceived threat to your survival circuitry. Your conscious mind desperately wants the expansion, but your ancient biological body fiercely resists it because scale feels like walking into a massive open field where any predator can see you.
Okay, so the hard science explains why the fear is so intense. But if our biology is screaming at us to stay small and hidden, why do we ever change? Why not just stay in the cave forever? I think this is where the mythic storytelling frameworks become so important, like Joseph Campbell's hero's journey.
Campbell's framework is universal because it mirrors our psychological development perfectly. In every myth, the hero leaves the safety of the known world. They cross the threshold, they face severe trials, they undergo a massive internal transformation, and they acquire some kind of wisdom or treasure. But the journey isn't complete when they find the treasure.
The hardest part is the final stage. The hero must return to the village.
They have to come back home. Because private evolution is relatively safe. You can sit in your bedroom, read 100 books, meditate for hours, go to therapy, and completely rewrite your internal belief system.
Yeah.
You can become a totally different person in isolation.
But the growth doesn't actually stabilize until it is witnessed.
Exactly. It doesn't become fully real until it is witnessed by the community. The hero must return and embody that change under the direct observation of the very people who knew them before they left.
Because embodiment under observation forces coherence. You cannot half be yourself when the entire village is watching you. The pressure of their gaze acts as a crucible. You either fold under the pressure and contract back into your old role, or you are forced to fully integrate your new identity into external reality.
Visibility is the crucible that locks the growth into place.
I love how the mythic aligns so perfectly with the biology. But this concept of visibility doesn't just apply to our emotional relationships or family dynamics.
Right.
We can apply this exact same lens to our professional lives, specifically to how we innovate and the tools we use.
This is a really crucial pivot, because when we discuss identity evolution in the modern world, we have to talk about how our technological tools shape our self-concept. When you adopt new tools to scale your capabilities, your actual identity shifts.
There is a story about a modern digital creator that illustrates this perfectly. Let's imagine a creator who has spent the last 10 years working entirely solo. They built their whole identity around the grind. One microphone, one camera, doing all the tedious hours of editing manually. It was exhausting, but it felt safe. They knew their limits, and their audience loved them for that raw, handmade aesthetic.
But eventually, they hit a wall, and they decide to evolve their process. They start actively collaborating with artificial intelligence.
Right. And the transition usually starts practically. They use the AI to structure some outlines or tighten up their syntax, but very quickly it triggers a much deeper structural shift. The ideas start becoming significantly more layered. The creator realizes they are no longer constrained by the arbitrary ceiling of what one tired human can produce in a week. Their capacity scales dramatically.
But right on schedule, here comes the vulnerability hangover of innovation. The creator now has to share this evolved process with their audience. And the perception fear is massive. People hear the acronym AI, and they project all their own economic and existential fears onto it.
They judge the creator through a highly polarized lens. They call it a lazy shortcut. This is exactly where the creator has to stand in their present alignment without shrinking to make the traditionalist comfortable.
And from an objective standpoint, the focus in that moment cannot be on defending the technology itself. The creator does not need to waste energy giving a defensive presentation on why AI is an ethically sound tool. The focus is entirely on the identity evolution of the creator.
It's about having the internal fortitude to stand in the reality of how they work now.
It's aggressively rejecting reversion pressure. The intense urge to soften the blow by saying, well, guys, the AI just helps a little bit. It's mostly still just me grinding away in the basement. I promise I'm still suffering.
Avoiding that specific apologetic phrase is a profound act of professional courage. It is looking the audience in the eye and saying, no, this is how I work now. I am no longer defined by how much I struggle.
When you apologize for your tools or downplay your evolution to soothe someone else's anxiety, you are sending a devastating signal to your nervous system. You are telling your brain that your expansion is something to be ashamed of.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground. We've dissected the psychology, the evolutionary biology, and the professional application. Now, we need to get incredibly granular. If our bodies are hardwired to sound an alarm when we are seen in a new way, how do we handle this in real time?
How do we not panic in the produce aisle?
Exactly. We are going to slow the pacing down right now and walk through 3 highly practical somatic tools to keep you steady. This is your toolkit for biological regulation.
Tool number 1 is to anchor before exposure. This is about taking control of your biology before you ever step into the arena. If you know you are about to walk into a fraught family reunion or a high-stakes meeting, or even just hitting publish on a controversial post, you must deliberately signal safety to your body. You cannot reason your way out of a biological alarm. You have to feel your way out.
So mechanically, how do we actually send that signal?
It starts entirely in the physical body. Wherever you are, press your feet firmly and deliberately into the floor. Feel the solid ground. Then take a slow, deep inhale through your nose and ensure that your exhale is significantly longer than your inhale.
The long exhale is the key.
Biologically, a prolonged exhale mechanically stimulates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve acts as the primary brake pedal on your sympathetic nervous system. By extending the exhale, you physically lower your heart rate and force a message up to your brain that says, we are not being chased by a predator, we are safe.
Feet firm on the floor. Exhale longer than the inhale. And once the heart rate settles, we layer in a cognitive anchor. You, quietly, internally name 3 present-day qualities about yourself. Not who you used to be, who are you today? Maybe your 3 words are steady, curious, refined, or grounded, capable, clear.
The profound power of naming those specific qualities is that it fundamentally shifts your internal posture. You are no longer walking into that room in a defensive crouch, bracing for impact. You are walking in anchored entirely to your present reality.
That shift in posture is everything. Which brings us to tool number 2. And honestly, this might be the hardest one to execute in real time. Let silence hold you.
This tool directly short-circuits performance pressure. Imagine you state a new boundary, or someone questions your new direction. The immediate agonizing impulse is to fill the resulting space. You want to rush into the gap and verbally justify yourself to soften the tension.
The awkward silence is physical agony. You just want to verbally tap dance until they nod and validate you. Is it really practical to just stand there and say nothing? Doesn't that make you seem hostile?
It feels hostile internally because you are so used to managing other people's emotional comfort. But the practice here is to simply allow the pause to exist. Let there be a beat of silence. Do not rush to fill it with nervous justifications. Allow your nervous system to sit in the quiet tension without trying to fix it.
Just sit in it.
When you finally do respond, you respond from your anchored current identity. Not from a frantic defensive scramble. You do not owe anyone a spontaneous dissertation on the mechanics of your personal growth.
I am going to repeat that because it is so vital. You do not owe anyone a dissertation on your personal growth. Let the silence do the heavy lifting. And that leads perfectly into the final somatic tool, number 3. Do not over-translate your evolution.
This requires acute self-awareness of your own speech patterns. It is about catching the subtle impulse to soften your growth with minimizing language. You have to start noticing when you begin sentences with phrases like, well, I just sort of, or I know it's not really a big deal, but...
We do that constantly. And we do it specifically to make the other person feel less threatened by our change. We shrink ourselves to fit their comfort zone.
Precisely. The intervention here is to catch those softeners and replace them with absolute, unadorned clarity. Instead of, I just sort of decided to, you say, this is how I work now. Instead of, I know it's weird, but you say, this feels deeply aligned for me. Clear, neutral statements of fact.
What I find most profound about these 3 tools is the underlying mechanism of why they work. When you do these things, you aren't actually managing the room. You aren't controlling the other person's reaction at all. You are strictly regulating your own biology.
Yes. When you press your feet into the floor, when you refuse to break the silence, when you speak with unadorned clarity, you are actively teaching your body a new lesson. You are providing real-time evidence to your nervous system that visibility is survivable. You showed up, you were seen, and you didn't die.
And when the biological body finally learns that visibility is survivable, the new identity stabilizes.
It stabilizes.
Let's go one layer deeper. Let's look all the way under the hood. Because even if we consciously use the breathing tools and the language tools, there is usually a core bug in our mental software that keeps triggering the panic in the first place. We need to debug the core static belief.
If we trace reversion pressure and performance pressure all the way down to their root, we almost always find one subconscious belief running quietly in the background. It usually sounds something like this. If they see the real, unvarnished me, I will lose connection.
Let's do a quick somatic check right now. Think about a recent moment where you felt deeply exposed. Maybe you shared a highly unpopular opinion in a meeting or unveiled a creative project. Notice what happens in your physical body right now just thinking about that moment. Don't analyze the thought, just feel the body. Does your chest suddenly tighten? Do your shoulders creep up?
That physical constriction is the static belief at work. Your body has erroneously equated visibility with abandonment, but we can psychologically reframe this deeply held fear by looking at the concept of congruence. True psychological health requires an alignment between your internal self-concept and your external expression in the world.
If you are feeling one way internally, but you're performing a totally different compliant character externally to please others, you are in a state of incongruence, and living in that gap tears you apart over time.
The psychological reframe we need to install to overwrite that static bug is this. Authenticity does not destroy relationships. It filters them.
Wow. Let that land. Authenticity filters relationships.
When you show up congruently, the dynamic of your relationships will inevitably shift. Some people will naturally resonate with the new you and step closer. Others may need time to adjust their lens. And yes, some may realize they only like the compliant version of you, and they may step away. But that filtering process is a necessary refinement of your life. It is not a rejection of your inherent worth.
Filtering is refinement, not rejection. So we need to consciously install new internal code. The new code is, I can be seen without being consumed. My identity does not depend on their interpretation.
Saying that phrase and eventually embodying it changes the entire landscape of how you interact with the world. You can be highly visible and still retain your complete sovereignty.
I want to ask some real-time reflection questions. You don't need to answer these out loud, but be radically honest with yourself. Where in your life are you still hiding your growth? Are there specific rooms or family dynamics where you instinctively dim your lights? Where are you reverting to an outdated version of yourself just because it avoids temporary conflict? And what specific truth about who you have become feels absolutely terrifying to embody publicly?
Those are weighty questions, but they are essential, because wherever you are hiding those truths, you are actively maintaining a state of incongruence, which keeps your nervous system in a state of chronic stress.
To help integrate everything we've discussed today, we want to walk you through a really powerful conceptual visualization. Let's build this space together.
If you're driving, obviously keep your eyes on the road, but if you're in a safe, quiet place, just soften your gaze or close your eyes for a moment.
Take a breath.
Take a deep, slow breath in and an extra long breath out. I want you to imagine in your mind's eye that you are standing in the center of a bridge. This is not a fragile rope bridge swaying in the wind. It is a massive, solid, wide bridge made of thick stone. It is deeply grounded and immovable.
The lighting around you is completely natural and clear. No confusing fog, just clean, even daylight.
Behind you, on one side of the bridge, stands the past version of you. Not a bad version, just an earlier iteration. And gathered on that side are all the people who knew you then and who expect you to remain that way. Ahead of you, on the other side, is the future. Open space, raw possibility. And you are standing right in the middle, feeling the stone beneath your feet.
Now, imagine the people from your past are watching you. They might call out to you. They use an old nickname. They reference an old dynamic. In that moment, you feel that magnetic pull in your chest to turn back around. The urge to walk off the bridge and go back to being who they expect you to be.
But in this visualization, instead of turning back, you practice holding your ground. You feel the solid stone under your feet. You look back at them, acknowledge them, but you do not move backward. You simply state, clearly and calmly, "This is where I am."
This is where I am. There's no apology attached to it, no explanation, just a neutral statement of fact. You simply allow them to see you standing there.
You are exactly who you are supposed to be right now in this moment.
That is the essence of standing steady in your evolution. That is the true embodiment of congruence.
Take one more deep breath and let's come back. This visualization beautifully maps onto the concept of identity lag. And this is something we are going to dive into heavily in the next deep dive, episode 111. But identity lag occurs during periods of rapid growth. It happens when your external world, your boundaries, your professional scale has evolved much faster than your internal self-concept.
You have practically crossed the bridge externally, but your internal nervous system is still lagging behind, desperately trying to catch up to the new coordinates.
You are living inside an evolution your body hasn't fully metabolized yet. This explains imposter syndrome perfectly. When you feel like a fraud, it's not because you are a fraud, it's because your internal identity is experiencing lag.
When you feel that intense vulnerability hangover, it is not a red flag that you've made a mistake. It is the ultimate, undeniable proof that you have actually crossed the bridge. You are standing in entirely new territory. And the lag is simply the biological time it takes for your nervous system to map the landscape and realize it is safe.
The only way to successfully close that gap is to remain visible. You cannot retreat to the cave. You have to stand on the bridge, exposed to the light long enough for your physical body to realize it will survive.
Let's pull all of these threads together. We started by defining the vulnerability hangover, that raw aftershock of being truly seen. We identified the three internal pressures that force you into hiding: reversion, performance, and perception fear.
We explored the raw biology, understanding that our nervous systems interpret social exposure as a physical threat. And crucially, we learned somatic tools to hack that biology in real time, anchoring your body, embracing silence, and refusing to use minimizing language.
And finally, we visualized standing firmly on the bridge, recognizing that identity lag is the ultimate proof of expansion. Which brings us to a specific call to action for you this week. Do not try to overhaul your entire life all at once. Just look for one small moment of visibility, one brief conversation, or one boundary you need to hold.
In that moment, before you react, anchor yourself. Press your feet into the floor, take that deliberate exhale, and speak clearly without softening your truth. Say, "This is how I work now," and then observe. Don't try to fix the tension. Watch who adjusts to your new shape.
You are actively teaching your nervous system that visibility is survivable. I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought to mull over. We spend so much energy terrified of alienating people with our evolved identities. We shrink ourselves just to ensure they stay comfortable. But what if the people you are so desperately afraid of upsetting are actually deeply exhausted by their own outdated roles?
That is such a paradigm-shifting perspective.
What if they are secretly trapped inside their own heavy armor, playing a part they outgrew a decade ago, but they don't know how to stop? What if your courage to stand visibly in your evolution is the exact permission slip they've been waiting for to finally drop their own armor?
By simply allowing yourself to be seen, you might be handing them the key to cross their own bridge. And honestly, maybe next time I'm in the produce aisle, I'll remember that too.
I think we both will. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been a truly incredible exploration of what it means to hold your ground. Remember, your internal growth only truly becomes real in the world the exact moment you allow it to be seen. Keep standing on the bridge. We will see you next time.